When the settlers were about to burn her alive, the war cries rising on the horizon changed everything. The story that began that day would turn into a fire no one could ever stop. We're just a few steps away from reaching 1,500 subscribers, and we'd be honored to have you with us. Thank you to every kind soul who's joined us so far. With your support, we share peaceful, heartfelt stories that warm the soul. If you enjoy calm, meaningful stories, don't forget to subscribe. You're part of this family now. Now, make yourself comfortable. It's time for the story. By midday, the sun was climbing slowly in the sky, and in the middle of the square, piles of dry wood had been stacked around a thick post. Mixed in with the logs were thin branches and resinous pine pieces, so it would catch fire quickly. Emma Keller's wrists were bound so tightly with rough cords that her pulse throbbed at her fingertips. Her thin white dress was wrinkled, as if she'd been pulled from sleep at midnight. Her feet were still bare. There were bruises on her cheeks and dried blood at the corner of her mouth. The slap Pastor Marcus had dealt her from horseback still burned. The faces surrounding her were hardened with hatred. Men had their hands resting on the grips of their guns. Women whispered prayers through clenched lips, and children stared silently, as if watching a show. One woman had loosely braided Emma's hair so the fire wouldn't start from her hair first. That's how calculated their cruelty was. Pastor Marcus shouted scripture in his deep voice, yelling, "We are cleansing the evil among us." No one had listened to Emma. 2 days ago, she'd been blamed for a child's death, declared cursed. She had said the boy had eaten poisonous berries, but no one believed her. Whispers about how her mother spoke to snakes, her father called the storms, had been enough to turn her knowledge of plants into evidence against her. When the pastor lowered the torch to the wood, the crackling flames rose instantly. Heat licked at Emma's ankles. Smoke filled her throat, making her eyes water. She didn't look down. Her knees shook, but she was determined to stand. Just then, a sharp, piercing war cry rang out from a distance. It cut through the sky as it drew nearer. The sound of horses neighing swelled along with a rising cloud of dust. The crowd flinched and reached for weapons, but it was too late. From the hills, Comanche warriors with faces painted for war thundered down like lightning. Arrows hissed through the air, spears found their marks. A settler in the front row fell before he could even draw his gun, pinned beneath a spear that struck the church wall behind him. Panic swept the square. Women screamed and scattered, children dropped to the ground, and men fell before they could aim their weapons. The flames hadn't loosened Emma's ropes. They were still tight. As smoke burned her eyes, a warrior on horseback rode up to her. On his black-painted face, there was no rage, only a strange determination. Another warrior came up from behind and, with one swift motion, cut her bonds. Emma collapsed to the ground, her breath ragged, her lungs burning. Strong arms lifted her up and threw her onto the horse's saddle. The horse burst out of the square at a gallop, and Emma couldn't even lift her head. The last thing she saw before her eyes closed was Pastor Marcus lying lifeless in the dust beside the torch he had dropped. As the pounding of hooves faded into the distance, Emma's consciousness slipped into darkness. She had no idea where she was being taken, only that she'd been snatched from death at the very moment she was about to burn. But she hadn't yet realized that this rescue could be the beginning of a new danger. When Emma opened her eyes, she heard unfamiliar sounds. Deep drum beats mixed with the moan of the wind, bursts of laughter here and there, low voices speaking. She was lying on a bed made of soft animal hides. Around her, colorful fabrics were stretched over wooden poles. The air inside the tent smelled of smoke, but it wasn't the biting threat of fire, it was the warmth of a wood-burning hearth. When she tried to sit up, her head spun, and she collapsed back down. A dark-haired woman sitting beside her said something in a language Emma didn't understand, then placed a damp cloth on her forehead. Blue and white paint ran from the woman's cheeks to her temples. Her gaze wasn't harsh, but it was unfamiliar. When Emma's eyes started to drift closed, the woman gave a slight shake of her head, allowing her to sleep. When she woke again, the sun was setting outside the tent. The sky had turned into a sea of crimson, the sun slowly sinking into the horizon. From outside came the sound of children playing around a fire and the smell of roasting meat. Emma noticed the warrior watching her closely. It was the same man who had saved her. Tall, broad-shouldered, with dark, piercing eyes. He walked with measured steps, and everyone around him seemed to treat him with respect. Emma didn't know why she'd been rescued. Settlers had spoken of the Comanche as if they were monsters beheading enemies, kidnapping women. Yet she was still alive, and no one had touched her. Maybe they planned to demand a ransom, or maybe there was another reason. After a while, an old man entered the tent. Bone necklaces hung around his neck, and embroidered hides draped over his shoulders. He examined Emma's wounds, touched the bruises on her arms, then nodded and left. The woman whose name Emma still didn't know handed her a piece of meat. Emma hesitated at first, but hunger won out. When night fell, the warrior came to the fire. Looking at Emma, he spoke slowly but clearly in English. "You did not die?" Emma nodded. "No." He went on. "You should have. Your people wanted to burn you." Emma felt a sting from the cut at the corner of her mouth as she answered. "They were never my people." The man's gaze deepened. For a moment, there was silence. Then he said, "You have the eyes of an owl." Emma raised her eyebrows. "Is that a good thing?" The owl sees what others cannot. But most people do not like the owl. Emma understood that well. She looked up at the stars so different from the narrow, hate-filled streets of the town. Then, in a low voice, she asked, "Why did you save me?" The man stared into the fire as he answered, "Fire is dangerous. But sometimes you take the fire and tame it." That night, Emma slept very little. Inside her, there was something more than fear. Something she couldn't yet name. Maybe anger, maybe the will to survive. All she knew was that she was no longer just a victim. At dawn, as the rising sun painted the camp in shades of gold, Emma sat a little way from the tents, watching the smoke from the fires curl up into the sky. The marks from the ropes were still on her wrists, and her body was still covered in bruises, but the pain no longer sat at the front of her mind. What occupied her thoughts now was why she was still free. She wasn't a prisoner here, but she wasn't exactly a guest, either. The children watched her with curious eyes, while the women kept a cautious distance. She finally heard the name of the warrior who had saved her, Adrian Grey Wolf. When she first heard it, she thought how perfectly the wolf part suited him. He was quiet, but there was a sharp awareness in his steps, in his gaze. When he entered a tent, everyone's posture shifted. He didn't need to shout to give orders, his presence alone was enough. That day, the dark-haired woman Red Sky came to her again, carrying a warm bowl in her hands. Inside was a rich, meaty soup, which she offered to Emma. Her English was broken, but enough. "You eat like a ghost." Emma smiled faintly. "That's how I feel." Red Sky crouched down, squinting as she studied her. "You are not afraid?" Emma shrugged. "I used to be. But now, I don't know. Should I be?" The woman gave a slight smile. "Grey Wolf says you carry fire. Not the burning kind. Another kind." In that moment, Emma wondered what the warrior truly thought of her. She didn't have to wait long to find out. That afternoon, Grey Wolf called her to the fire. They sat for a long time without looking at each other. Then he spoke. "Why did they want to kill you?" Emma kept her eyes on the flames as she answered, "Because I wasn't one of them. I knew plants my mother taught me about healing herbs. They called me a witch." "You speak clearly. You are not weak." Emma gave a bitter smile. "Once they've tried to burn you, your words change." He nodded. "You have no home now." "No, then you are dangerous. Only if they try to burn me again." At that, Grey Wolf let out a short, unexpected laugh. The spark in his eyes made Emma feel, for the first time, a kind of connection to him. As the days passed, Emma began helping with small tasks around the camp, fetching water, gathering wood. Her strength was limited, but her willingness didn't go unnoticed. One evening, Red Sky handed her a bundle of dried plants: willow bark, sweetgrass, wild mint. "For the sick," she said. Just then, the fevered groans of a child came from one of the tents. Without hesitation, Emma went to him, felt his forehead, and brewed a tea from the herbs. By morning, the fever had broken. The news spread through the camp like a whisper. But kindness didn't always make friends. One day, while gathering plants, two young warriors stepped into her path. The looks on their faces were clear displeasure and anger. The slighter of the two said something sharp. Emma didn't understand the words, but the tone made the insult obvious. Then a deep, commanding voice cut through the air from behind. "Grey Wolf." With just a look, he made the two men step back. Turning to Emma, he said, "Don't walk alone. I'm not afraid." "Good. Fear feeds your enemy." That night, Grey Wolf handed her a short knife carved from bone. "To protect yourself." Emma ran her fingers over its smooth, cold surface. "Why are you helping me?" "Because you don't want to be one of us. And maybe that makes you belong to us." Just then, the stillness of the camp was broken by the heavy steps of returning scouts. Their faces were tense, They're breathing fast. Settlers are coming, one of them said. More than 30, armed with rifles. And they're following your trail. Emma's fingers tightened around the knife. They want me. Gray Wolf's eyes darkened. Not just you. All of us. Emma stared into the fire and whispered, then let's give them a reason to be afraid. In the morning, there was a strange smell on the earth, metallic, sharp, as if the air itself was warning of an approaching storm. Emma stood at the edge of the camp, holding the bone-handled knife Gray Wolf had given her. Her hair was tightly braided, the old white dress long gone, replaced by a leather outfit suited for movement. Around her chest hung a small pouch and a belt carrying medicinal herbs. Beside her was Red Sky, who had been trying to teach her how to use a bow in the first light of dawn. The scouts returned silent as shadows, but urgent. 32 men, 2 wagons, long rifles. Less than half a day away. They're moving fast. As Gray Wolf prepared his horse, the camp began to move with quiet precision. Some women gathered belongings, others prepared to stay. There was a muted worry in the children's faces. Emma walked up to Gray Wolf. Without taking his eyes off the horizon, he spoke. You can still leave. They want you. Not just me. They want you too. I'm not leaving. Gray Wolf looked at her differently then. In his eyes, there was no longer just the cool detachment of a leader toward a stranger, but the respect for someone who would stand beside him in battle. Then stand with us. I already am. The plan was simple. Set an ambush at the narrow part of the valley, slow the wagons, split the riders, and hit them in quick strikes. It wouldn't be a suicide mission, it was meant to be a lesson. Emma took position behind a large rock on the eastern slope with Red Sky and 2 other women warriors. In her hands was a bow, and in her quiver only a few arrows. Red Sky reminded her again, breathe, draw, wait, then release. By midday, the sound of wagon wheels and hoofbeats echoed between the stone walls of the valley. A cry from an eagle was the signal. In an instant, the sky filled with whistling arrows. The shouts of settlers and the blasts of rifles tangled together in the air. In the first moments, one rider went down, another fell from a wagon. When Emma peeked over the rock, she saw a familiar face, blacksmith Harlan. She remembered it was his hands that had tied her ropes 2 days before. She drew her arrow, her hands trembling as she took aim. The bowstring snapped, and the arrow sank into Harlan's thigh. He screamed and went down. Emma was shaking and forgot to breathe. Good shot, Red Sky said, already shifting her gaze to another target. As smoke settled into the valley, the Comanche warriors appeared and vanished like ghosts. Gray Wolf had dismounted, cutting down 2 men in close combat with his tomahawk and knife. Then, from the far end of the valley, a figure came charging in, face twisted with rage, rifle in hand. Pastor Marcus's younger brother, David. His eyes were locked on Gray Wolf. He had him in his sights, but Gray Wolf was locked in a struggle with 2 other settlers. Emma saw the rifle of a dead settler lying beside her. Without thinking, she grabbed it, raised the barrel, found her mark. When she pulled the trigger, the sound cracked through the valley like thunder. David's body jerked back, the rifle falling from his hand. Gray Wolf turned, and their eyes met. Emma's hands were shaking, but her gaze was steady. The fight lasted another 20 minutes. The settlers began to scatter, wagons abandoned. As dust and the scent of blood rose from the valley, Emma knelt with the rifle beside her, breathing silently. Inside, there was only stillness, no urge to cry, no cry of victory. Just a deep emptiness. When Gray Wolf came to her, his voice was low. You saved me. Emma nodded. I didn't think. I just did it. Now you understand what it means to take a life. Emma whispered without looking away from the fire. I don't want to, but if I have to, I'll do it again. After the battle, the valley grew quiet. The groans of the wounded, the distant pounding of fleeing horses' hooves. The air still smelled of blood and gunpowder. Emma stood barefoot on crushed grass and ash. She had lost her boots during the fight. Her hands were stained with dried blood. Behind her, the rifle leaning against the rock was still in place. She hadn't touched it since the last shot. Gray Wolf approached in his usual silence. Beneath the cloth wrapped around his shoulder, a dark red stain was spreading. There was no sign of pain on his face, but his eyes followed the dust of the settlers disappearing into the horizon. At dawn, we moved the camp west, he said. Let the hills watch our backs. Emma, her throat dry, didn't take her eyes off him. I'll help, she said. Gray Wolf's answer was short. You already have. That night, there was no celebration in camp. Only the wounded were tended to, The dead remembered with quiet prayers. Emma sat beside Red Sky, stirring an herbal tea over the fire. No one told her to leave. She had crossed an invisible line. She was now within this people. Near midnight, Red Sky came with a small bundle in her hands. She placed it in Emma's palms. Inside was a small owl figure, carved from bone and darkened with soot. "May its spirit protect you," she said. It saw what others did not. Emma turned the figure between her fingers and nodded. "I don't walk like prey anymore," she said. Red Sky smiled. "You're not." The next days passed in constant work. Tents were repaired, arrows and spears remade, wounds healed. Emma didn't stay idle. She brewed herbal teas, carried water, cut hides. Her body grew tired, but her mind was sharper, her gaze harder. One morning, as the sky began to turn gray, Emma climbed the hill at the edge of the camp. Behind her, the camp was waking. Before her stretched an endless view. Then Gray Wolf appeared in silent steps. "The elders are speaking of you," he said. Emma kept her eyes on the horizon. "What are they saying?" "That you've brought both curse and salvation." Emma let out a short laugh. "They're not wrong. They ask where you belong." Emma narrowed her eyes. "I'm neither settler nor Comanche. But I know one thing. No one will ever burn me again." Gray Wolf pulled a short-handled tomahawk from his belt. The handle was wrapped in painted leather, marked with carved symbols. "This is not a gift," he said. "It's a burden." Emma took it, feeling its weight. "I'll carry it." That night, under a thin crescent moon, a figure appeared at the edge of camp, covered in dust. He was holding up a piece of white cloth. Emma went to him with 2 scouts. He was young, in his early 20s, with a fresh scar on his face. "A settler. I didn't come to fight," he said, his voice unsteady. Emma narrowed her eyes. "Then why are you here?" "The town is falling apart. Some are still after revenge. Others, they're wondering what you'll do." "And what do they think?" "Some say you'll come back and burn the town." A cold glint flashed in Emma's eyes. Could they be right? The man swallowed hard, unable to answer. She left him in the scout's hands and returned to camp. Inside her, the old fear had been replaced by something else, resolve. By morning, the camp was quiet, but it wasn't the quiet of fear. On people's faces was the steady look of those preparing for an approaching storm. No one spoke unless it was necessary. Everyone focused on what needed to be done. Emma stood in the center of camp watching the arrowheads were being oiled, spears sharpened, horses saddled. There was a heavy tension in the air, but it wasn't for running, it was for standing their ground. Emma gathered in the square. Gray Wolf stood beside her. He didn't speak, only stood tall at her shoulder. Emma raised her voice, locking eyes with each person as she spoke. "They came here because we lived. Because we weren't afraid. Because we didn't bow. What they couldn't do with fire, they now want to do with fear. But we're still here. We're stronger. We're wiser. And we stand together." A quiet murmur rippled through the crowd. It wasn't a cheer, it was the whisper of people bound by the same thought. Gray Wolf stepped forward. He didn't speak, but his presence alone seemed to seal Emma's words. Emma lifted her tomahawk into the air. The steel caught the morning sun for all to see. "We'll show them what's born from their own fire." Preparations went on until evening. Men and women worked shoulder to shoulder. Emma and Red Sky prepared bundles of herbs not only for treating wounds, but for creating smoke to confuse the enemy. Even the children carried arrows in silence. When the sun set, an indigo sky settled over the camp. As Emma adjusted her tomahawk to fit her grip, Red Sky came up beside her. "You speak like a chief," she said with a faint smile. "I'm just saying I'm no one's prey anymore," Emma replied. "Then teach them what it means to be a hunter," Red Sky said, narrowing her eyes. Near midnight, Emma stood at the edge of the camp. Around her neck hung the owl charm. At her belt, the tomahawk. In the distance, she could see the dusty road leading back to the settlers' town. She didn't know when or if she would ever go there again. But she knew one thing. They hadn't forgotten the day they tried to burn her. And now, they faced a different Emma. As the wind scattered the ashes of the fire into the air, Emma took a deep breath. The fire still burning inside her no longer consumed her. It pushed her forward, shaped her, sharpened her. The settlers had thought she would be reduced to ash. Instead, she had been reborn from it, and this time, she held the flame in her own hands. This wasn't just the beginning of revenge. It was the first step into a new life, one she would live by her own rules. And she was ready to take that step without a moment's hesitation. By the way, we noticed something small. Most people who watch these stories aren't actually subscribed to the channel. Maybe we get caught up in the moment or just forget to hit the button. But your support truly helps us keep creating stories like this. If this story moved you, don't forget to like the video, share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe to the channel.